Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Young, the creator of this cartoon. I'm not trying to adhere to any particular political ideology, though I must admit I'm probably a little bit right of center in my thinking. With artificial intelligence providing the artistic talent, something I lack, I've been able to put my thoughts and ideas into these political cartoons. Today's cartoon shows President Trump filling up his presidential limousine at a gas station, declaring that our country produces more oil than it needs. Behind him, a strategic oil reserve tanker is connected directly to an underground reserve feeding the station. The cartoon raises a question worth asking. If the United States genuinely produces more oil than it consumes, and it does, why are we drawing upon the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at all? The factual context is important. In March 2026, the Trump administration authorized the release of 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This was part of a coordinated international release of more than 400 million barrels by 32 countries through the International Energy Agency, the largest such release in history. The stated reason was the disruption to global oil supply caused by the war with Iran, particularly the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which normally carries about 20% of the world's oil. So there's a legitimate answer to the question my cartoon raises. American oil production doesn't insulate American consumers from global prices. Oil trades on world markets. When supply disruptions occur in the Middle East, prices rise in Iowa and Texas just as they do in Europe and Japan. Releasing the strategic reserves can ease that pressure, regardless of how much oil any single country produces. But I think the cartoon still raises a question worth asking. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was created in 1975 after the Arab oil embargo. Its purpose was to protect American energy security in a genuine emergency, a sudden, severe disruption that no normal market response can address. For decades, presidents of both parties treated reserve releases as exceptional measures, used sparingly. Over the past several years, that restraint has eroded. The Biden administration released roughly 180 million barrels from the reserve in 2022 to address gas prices following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A release that critics argued was as much about political optics ahead of a midterm elections as about genuine emergency need. President Trump criticized those releases sharply at the time, calling them irresponsible. Now, he has authorized a release of similar magnitude under similar circumstances, addressing a supply disruption caused largely by the administration's own decision to engage militarily with Iran. The Department of Energy has stated that the reserve will be refilled, but that promise depends on future oil prices and future political conditions. This is what my cartoon is really asking. Not whether the March 2026 release was justified, that's a debate where reasonable people can disagree. The question is whether we're moving toward a posture where the Strategic Petroleum Reserve functions less as an emergency tool of last resort and more as a routine instrument of price management. Once a tool meant for genuine emergencies becomes routine, the line between emergency and ordinary blurs, and that has consequences. The reserve exists to give the United States options in a true crisis, such as a hostile blockade, a catastrophic disruption, a war that cuts off supply for months or years. If we've drawn it down to address shorter term price pressure, even justified price pressure, we have less in reserve when the next genuine emergency comes. There's also a fairness question worth raising. Trump criticized the Biden administration's reserve releases as political and irresponsible. The current release, made under different circumstances, is being presented as responsible stewardship. Both can't be entirely true. Either reserve releases for supply disruptions are legitimate policy, in which case the Biden releases deserve more credit than they received, or they're problematic political tools. in which case the current release deserves more scrutiny than it is getting. My own view is that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve should be preserved for genuine emergencies only. The 1975 founding purpose, protecting American energy security against a sudden, catastrophic supply disruption that no market response could address, is the standard that should govern its use. Once we expand that definition to include any significant price pressure from international supply disruptions, we have effectively turned the reserve into a routine policy tool rather than an emergency one. The Biden administration's 2022 releases following Russia's invasion of Ukraine were already a substantial expansion of how the reserve gets used. The current release for the Iran related disruption extends that pattern further. This concerns me, regardless of which administration is doing it. A reserve drawn down repeatedly for serious but not catastrophic disruptions is a reserve that won't be there when something truly catastrophic happens. The kind of crisis the reserve was actually designed for, a long sustained blockade of major shipping lanes, a coordinated supply cutoff by hostile powers, the kind of disruption that lasts not months but years, would find us with substantially diminished options to respond. The Trump administration is committed to refilling the reserve with 200 million barrels within a year. I hope that commitment is kept. But the same commitments were made in connection with previous releases, and history shows that political administrations tend to prioritize immediate price relief over long-term strategic restoration. Replenishment depends on willing taxpayers, favorable oil prices, and political circumstances that may not align with the schedule. The harder question this raises is what we count as an emergency in the first place. The war with Iran is real, the supply disruption is real, American consumers feel real pain at the pump. None of that is in dispute. But every supply disruption affects consumers, and if every disruption justifies tapping the reserve is no longer strategic, it's operational. And that fundamentally changes what the United States has to draw on when a genuine catastrophe arrives. What do you think? Should the Strategic Petroleum Reserve be reserved strictly for catastrophic emergencies, or is using it to manage significant supply disruptions like the current Iran situation appropriate policy? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this video helpful, then please subscribe, leave a comment, or even share it with a friend. Thanks for listening.